You are listening to Arts on the Air, a bi-weekly-ish interview show dedicated to Savannah, Georgia's artists, musicians, and authors. Each episode will feature a guest in conversation about their philosophy, practice, and current projects, as well as their thoughts on the state of the arts in our community of Savannah. Our theme music is a clip of Summer Nights by the Eric Jones Trio. It's provided by our friend Mark Chesanow, who plays with the Eric Jones Trio every Thursday and Sunday at Good Times Jazz Bar downtown. Hey everyone, welcome to Arts on the Air. This is Tamara Garvey and I'm with Will Penny today. Welcome, Will.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I will read a little bit of your statement from your site. Will is a multi-disciplinary artist whose practice incorporates an assortment of media ranging from painting, video, sculpture, programming, and projection. His work aims to combine traditional art making tools with new technologies to create space to explore themes such as embodiment, presence, fantasy, and the sublime. It's an adult-sounding statement.
I've been trying to refine it over time.
Yeah.
say as much as I need, but not too much, I hope.
You grew up in Ontario, and then did you come to Savannah for SCAD?
Yes. I first came to Savannah in about 2006, and I transferred in to get my bachelor's in painting. And was here for a couple of years. I left and worked in New York and Toronto for a couple of years. Came back for grad school, and then I've stuck around ever since. So it was about like 10 years ago. I finished my master's in painting at SCAD. And when I left, I realized like I really wanted to come back just specifically to finish my education and come back for my master's degree. And I had so much fun just a couple of years living in Savannah that it seemed like I could see myself pretty happily striking the right balance between school and live work, and it was a really fun time to be in Savannah, and somehow I have not left since. When
you first came here, so you came from really far away, were you looking at other art schools in the US, or how did you even come up with this?
No, it's an interesting path, because I actually had intended to go to the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, SCAD, in Halifax, and had applied and was accepted because they accepted transfer. The school that I was in Ontario is only a diploma issuing program, so usually what you would do is go to a degree issuing school after that and transfer your credits so that you could get a degree.
That's kind of more British style, I think, where they do like a certificate program and then the degree.
Because for a lot of the programs they have would be things that don't require a full degree. Like it might be trades, or it might be like a dental hygienist or nurse practitioner, or like things that like you really don't.
Cosmetology kind of thing.
Yeah, and so you get like very hands-on training. But oddly enough, they had a fine arts, visual arts program that was like 3 years. So I got a diploma from that, and there was a girl that I was dating while I was in my last year of that program, and she had visited Savannah with her family on vacation, and told me that she applied to go to SCAD, and that's what I never even heard of it, had never been to Savannah, had never really, like I'd been to Florida for vacation before.
You had not read Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil?
No, like I had no context at all. And so I just kind of like applied on a whim, because I was like, this might be interesting just to see. And I got accepted and got a scholarship, and made a big decision to come here to study painting instead of going to Halifax to study painting. So in some other universe, there was a version of me that was on the east coast of Canada.
The northern version?
Yeah, I don't know how that will fared, but...
But it's funny, so in the painting degree at SCAD, that like everything fine art is just you're getting a painting degree. So you could be doing sculpture or like performance art or like, anything kind of wacky, and you're getting a degree in painting. So when you came here, were you doing traditional painting, or?
Well, that was part of like both of the reasons to come, like for undergrad and for grad school, was I saw the faculty at the time before I came for transferring in, and a lot of the feedback that I was getting when I was at school in Canada was, this is great, we like what you're doing, but you need to paint this better. and there was no
just more technically better.
Yeah, there's like it's like, and I'd like, what do you want? Like, what do I like? There was no real formal instruction about like actual technical, like traditional painting techniques. So
were you doing realism painting back then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I felt kind of at a loss because I was like trying to do painting about all these different things, but the painting itself apparently wasn't good enough. And I had there's nowhere to turn to learn how to actually paint. And so when I came to SCAD originally, I was spending like all my time just working on learning how to paint proficiently.
Yeah.
And
I think their undergrad program really focuses on that anyway, right?
Yeah, it was a good time. The faculty that I worked with at the time were really, they knew their stuff and they helped me kind of really focus. And when I got out of that program, I was like stuck on the what to paint. Like I felt like I had the skills that I needed. Spent a long time trying to master paint, but then just had a lot of questions. And it was a good time for me to get out and see other things and go to museums and galleries and look at a lot of work and
start working on concepts.
Yeah, try to like absorb a lot of stuff. And then I knew when I was coming back for grad school, one of the main reasons that I wanted to come back to go to SCAD was I had seen firsthand that I could be a painter, but I could also dabble in so many other things. So that was kind of what I did. I was like equal parts working in industrial design and motion media design and visual effects, and could kind of bounce.
Even back then you were doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I could kind of build a curriculum around the one that was provided to me, where I could work in a lot of things and absorb a lot of different media and learn from a lot of people who were really good at what they were doing. And so it was kind of like a studio art degree without the usual, like a lot of other schools have like an open studio art program where you are kind of building more of a like a la carte curriculum. And even though the designation was painting, like it kind of felt like that coming back. And so that was a big expansion for my work of just putting on a lot of hats, trying out a lot of stuff.
That's cool that you were even going out to those other programs and like dabbling in classes in motion media design, because I feel like most people studying painting or something more fine arty weren't delving into that side at all. Like there's kind of typical things you might reach out to, like illustration or fibers has more crossover with painting. So you must have been really unique in the design classes you were taking as a painting major. Yeah,
I think it was a lot of like sculptural concerns, and I was building things, trying to expand the canvases that I was working on, and that led me to working on computers with CAD design and modeling, building like architectural spaces, and that got me to working with computers and 3D models and VR and interactive. And so that's kind of like how, because I was not really a particularly like tech interested or tech savvy person before I really focused in on grad school. I was just trying to paint, and I like would use Photoshop on occasion, but it wasn't something that I didn't have like a lot of access where I grew up to like a lot of technology. Yeah. We were kind of lagging behind in like how quickly we got computers and the internet, and so it didn't, and like I had friends that had grown up like taking courses in programming.
Yeah, like that early programming.
Yeah, we had none of that. So
so it was really new for you to suddenly start delving into this really techie stuff.
Yeah, and it kind of provided a space where I could test a lot of things out quickly without having to, buy a lot of materials or worry about overhead. Working in a virtual space to work through ideas was really beneficial to me, because I could make anything and I could defy physics in the things that I was making, and I could look at things, and over time the capabilities of a lot of the stuff to like pre-render works that I would make, and instead of having to fabricate something that's really labor intensive just to look at it, there's certain things that can be kind of expedited through the software, and then you can see something that gets realized down the road. So,
not having to like lay paint down, wait for it to dry, and then try again. All that. Do you feel kind of, even now, do you feel like equally adept and liking both computer and digital arts, and also like building things with your hand, like building stretcher bars and things? Do you like that side as well?
It kind of goes in waves. Like there's months of time where I just want to work on a particular software program and I'll just be like glued to the computer. And then there's other times where I just don't want to even look at a computer. I'm just burnt out from screens. And I really just need to make things that don't revolve around computers. It's back and forth. So like I'm trying to figure out better routines in time where like I can allocate my days where like there's certain new programs that I just really, really, really want to learn. It's kind of like learning a new language. Like if I could really just focus for like an extended period of time, do I stretch it out in little chunks over time, or do I just really like commit? But then there's so many other things to do in the studio too that it like things usually go project by project where I might be dabbling with mirroring chemicals for a few days to understand how those work, or building an apparatus to make a hydro transfer process, or testing out animatronics for a few. And so it seems like I'm trying to kind of let all this, but right now like I really want to kind of slow down and paint conventionally, because I feel like I've got a lot of swirling ideas that aren't becoming as concrete as I'd like, and the time to like slow down and do something meticulous and painstaking seems nice right now.
So you're really in a state, even with just your day-to-day art practice, you're in like a flux state where you're trying to figure out how to allocate your days and your weeks, and
time management is like
you said, whether to delve really hard into one project or to spread everything out and do a little bit every day, you're still figuring out what's best for you.
Yeah because like that's like a thing that when I've got a lot of projects going on, I'll like wake up at 4 a.m. in the middle of the night and my brain will be like synapsing on how to solve this problem, or it's just work. But like it comes up where an idea for a project emerges, or like I have to put something to rest before I can move on to the next thing. And it's hard to make a routine out of that where I can do the same, because
if you're being driven by like what your subconscious did the night before, then suddenly you have to wake up and go with that. And
sometimes it's an idea that materializes in my mind that I don't have a use for, or a good excuse for, or even the resources to do, and I have to kind of like put that on a Post-it and like pin that to the wall for later. Like here's an idea for a project that I might jot it down. I don't sketch a lot, but I write a lot of notes down as like ideas come. So those kind of get backlogged, and when a show comes up or an opportunity to work on a commission or some kind of public installation, then some of those ideas like come back out and get it's just a matter of prioritizing, like what do I do with my time? What's the best use of it?
I've read that in general that you can keep paper and a pencil by the bed if you're the type to wake up and have some idea, and then you can just get it out and then you can fall asleep.
Like a dream journal.
Then you wake up and you look back at what you wrote and you're like, wow,
my trouble is putting myself back to once that like mode comes on,
where your mind is racing.
I'd be like, I just have to try to convince myself like you don't need to get up and go right to the studio to work on it. You should probably sleep.
You're like a mad scientist. You have to come out already.
leave it be, like whatever weird thing that I need to try to just wrestle with in the studio.
I'm curious though, some of your concepts and a lot of your art that you work with is nostalgia for the 80s and 90s and the graphics of it and like pop culture, and then you have this kind of recurring theme of like hockey masks, which I feel like is probably a mashup between 80s horror movies, but also you being Canadian and like hockey, so it kind of works on both levels. But I was sort of wondering, was your childhood very artsy, or were you more athletic or running around the woods? What was that like?
These kind of things that I've been working with more recently in the last couple of years are things that I'm trying to actually kind of go back in time more than I used to in my work, to re-examine my own like tendencies and preferences, and where a lot of the things that I've kind of like let seep through in my work, the more it becomes things that I'm just trying to kind of understand, the more it seems to become biographical in a way, where I didn't really set out with the intent of like digging through certain nostalgic motifs or trying to understand like parts of myself, but somehow I've kind of gone on this weird path where for some reason the motif of a goalie mask was something that I couldn't shake in my head for a while, and I didn't understand why at the time, but as I started like making works that were using the goalie mask, I was thinking, well, why would that be a symbol that keeps like jumping out at the forefront of my mind? Is it because I grew up playing hockey for most of my life until I left Canada. I was a goalie, and one of the first canvases that I had was actually painting the masks that I wore. And so there's kind of a weird attachment to the place that I actually learned how to use an airbrush and how to do type, like kind of hand lettering and calligraphy was on goalie masks. And, my dad would like work with me on showing me like how to pull a brush and like load a brush, and because I had art classes, but there was not like a lot of, it was just mostly like arts and crafts. And it was about like maybe the 6th grade that I started showing a proficiency for rendering. And I remember everyone was like, whoa, you're really good at art. You can like copy an image and draw it. And like, which I know like a lot of art school kids like have that moment where like you get like this heap of praise for like,
I think as a child, that's everybody's first inclination.
Like you're really good at this. Like, like I think like the root was just I could focus long enough to like control my hand in a way where I could photographically copy a thing that I would see. And it, like I would draw hockey posters, and I would like copy Magic the Gathering cards and like all these things. And so I started like thinking back on those times as like the weird branching of like why certain things are appealing to me at this age, what things have like culturally resurfaced in like trends and patterns, what things also seem like they have this other like broader connotations to other people that weren't just things that I resonate with. And so that's kind of been something interesting to like put out and explore in the last few kind of groups of work, is what these like symbols or kind of like objects that I can pull from my own experience, how those can be interpreted by other people's own like kind of experiences through time with those particular objects.
I wanted to talk to you about the nostalgia thing, because we're close to the same age. You're like about 40, so I'm a few years older than that. And definitely it's both that like in social media at this point we're far enough away from the 80s and 90s that just everyone in general is looking back on it. And there's podcasts I listen to of people just going back and talking about 80s and 90s shows and movies that we all miss. And there's all these like things on Instagram that are just, I follow one account that literally is just photos of old shopping malls that aren't existing anymore, and I look at them and I just am so like overwhelmed with emotion looking at these images of things that just don't exist anymore, like fax machines and old phones and shopping malls. And like it's a combination of all this in social media, looking at this, and then also just the fact of getting older, that everybody does start to look back on your own early life and think about that. And I think a combination also that like life is kind of scary right now in general, politically and environmentally, and I definitely tend to, I think it's like a really common thing to look back at your childhood and have a really rosy view of it and just assume that everything was easier and kinder and nicer back then. And possibly for our parents it was just as scary back then. I don't know, we'll never know. All I know is as a child it seems like that things were much better then, and so everyone who's about our age is really looking back at it.
Yeah, well, I feel like I have like a weird kind of mix of emotions towards my own adolescence, because I was definitely not particularly cool, and I was a weird kid growing up like in an area that was pretty rural, and like everyone was farmers, and I was a little bit different than like a lot of other kids, and I got bullied a lot, and I think a lot of the like weird anxieties that I've tried to unpack later in life also stem from weird interactions and like those kind of, those like weird traumas that you like replay in your mind like over and over and over again, like, which happen all the time. But it feels like a mix of like, there's the fun stuff that like when I see things online that are like people generating content around like retro movies and like toys and like cool things that are like, oh man, like that really takes me back, like it gives me these like good feels. But then there's also like things that I don't want to relive like at all, and sometimes I feel like I'm also trying to confront those as well, that it's kind of like a give and take of like the introduction might be like some humor in regards to like something that is shared or that I can remember as this like weird but it also all is like going back through memory, which feels like a strange place to excavate things sometimes too, because a lot of these things like exist in my mind in a weird way that have all these emotional attachments, and taking a thing that I haven't seen in like 20 to 30 years and trying to then recollect that thing and use it as a medium, or use it as like a found object, or repurpose it all of a sudden is interesting, because it's like, it's not something that I just picked up somewhere, or not something that I found. I know a lot of people that gather a lot of things and kind of use those in a way of like collaging concepts and objects and pieces, and
surrounding themselves with
like
the objects.
Remixing things. And I've been thinking about like remixing a lot and sampling, because in video work especially, I'm kind of like just pulling things and using it as like a bit or a piece, or it might be like it feels like music sometimes if you're like taking old samples from like a particular chord or like a vocal, and you're just kind of putting it in and seeing like how that can be reconfigured to make something new, but that still has notes of the original. How far do you get away from it? So visually it feels like that sometimes, but also like dealing with time and making time-based works or interactive works, you have a unique space to kind of flux between like the now and being present, but also being taken back. So I have a lot myself. I'm still trying to unpack from like where this work is going and what will be next with digging back in time.
The hockey mask thing in particular, I feel like there's sort of a coldness to it, of like hiding behind, it's like a shell.
Yeah.
And nobody sees you, and it's like a protective thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, I was with you for Halloween and you were dressed as Hannibal Lecter, which was also a mask. So it's kind of is this like a thing a little bit that you go back to, that you have like an affinity for this mask thing?
Yeah, they themselves, like, just as I think that's why I couldn't shake them as something that made sense with work I was making. It was about a year ago that I was like, I have to see this work through, that there's like the creepiness of it, the connection to Friday the 13th, the connection to also it being something that could be protective. I did a lot of digging into the history of like the development of hockey masks, because it was something that I knew roughly but not very well. And sometimes like these projects give me this weird space to do like research, like air quoting my research, because I can look into something to try to know it better and take information from that and then direct it back into the work. And sometimes like that can be used to help tell stories, or what's like the narrative component of this work, what does it mean, why have you chosen this? But also a lot of the time it's just part of the thing that steers my decisions, like knowing more about a thing, especially something that I felt like I knew personally from experience. Like maybe even if it was a talking big mouth Billy Bass, like a lot of people have had firsthand experiences with that object, from it being either like in their parents' basement in a den, or somebody, or they definitely had, like my uncle had one, somebody had one.
But we don't actually know that much about it.
And then me having an excuse to learn more about its history and the many iterations and how it's evolved, and is just is a kind of interesting space to work in, where I can start to like gain knowledge about all these things that, like, we have a lot of this on the internet now, where like you can find information about like odd things that used to be hard to track.
Who is cataloging these things? I'm so curious about that. Like
some of my favorite people.
How are we even able to watch 80s commercials on YouTube? Somebody has filmed them, I guess, on like tapes, and now has uploaded them to YouTube somehow?
There's recent video work that I did for an exhibition was taking downloaded videos of 90s TV commercials, and there was a guy who just has a YouTube channel where his brother in the 80s and 90s just basically like turned on his like VCR recorder nonstop and gathered like all the commercials from their local station, and he took all of the commercials out and like digitized them and has put them, he's basically like archiving all these commercials on YouTube, and they're there for people to use and consider and share, and it's just such a weird art. It's like a library of this stuff that
It's a cultural library.
Yeah.
I'm glad those tapes survive, because also it's like the medium that we were using to film and record things back then isn't, like things would break down. So things that were captured on like beta or VHS or cassette tapes, it's great that even survived for us to digitize it now.
Yeah. And then, like I stumbled upon that and was like, this is cool. Like, just watching these commercials like takes me back. And then
oh my God.
I can take those things and then, reconfigure them into something to be used in a work. And
I love commercials and like after school specials. You can find those on YouTube too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's some of that stuff I think like circulates in weird ways now with social media, where you get like bits and snippets of things like, G.I. Joe cartoons like repurposed with like a new voiceover or something. Like there's all kinds of like interesting like adaptations.
Yeah, like mashups.
Yeah, and a lot of them seem like it's just about making jokes or like getting likes and clicks and that stuff's fun, but sometimes I think I like will catch some of that content and it's more complex, like seeing somebody do interesting things with something that is so personalized, but that also then you like have that weird space where like with like geekdom and like cultures where people come together who are like big fans of Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever, and you have like common ground of your like shared enthusiasm of something. Like if I ever meet somebody who's as interested in the X-Files as I am, then we have lots to talk about, because like I could go on and on about like that subject, and I would likely be the type of candidate that would have wrote like some kind of weird Wikipedia page on a particular episode, and it's easier now I think to find like common ground on those like odd subjects online, especially. So
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I definitely want to talk about the Billy Bass later, because that was a really fun era for you. But I think a lot of what you're talking about in the nostalgia pieces is you had a big show at Laney Contemporary
just a few months ago.
Okay,
yeah.
You had tons of pieces. I'm curious how you started working with Laney Contemporary in general, because you're like represented by her, which is very cool. How did that come to be in general?
Yeah, so Susan Laney and I go way back. I met Susan when I was still in grad school, and at that time she was starting to bring together some artists in Savannah for a show at the Westoboo Festival in Augusta. And so there was this was 2014, and she invited me and some of my friends that I was working with, along with I think there's probably like 6 or 7 other Savannah artists. It was a pretty cool roster. And we all went to Augusta, Georgia, and took over this like old academy. It was this like huge building, and put on a show, and everyone had like multiple rooms and brought up a ton of work. And I was really pumped to be included in the show, because it was just a super fun opportunity. Got to know Susan, and then over time we kind of kept like close and working together, and she shifted from working with the Jack Lee Gallery, consulting, curating at SCAD, and eventually doing more of her own work, and then over time started kind of building the gallery out more and more. And so I think I was around, and it was good timing for me that she was building something and I was myself trying to like seek representation.
Yeah. Because she found you at grad school? Like she toured at one of the open studios or something?
That's a good question. I think it was just like friends of friends at some point, like had just met in the right circles. And that's like, I can't remember like the first time that we met.
Yeah.
Susan might know. But it's definitely like, it was a time where there wasn't a lot going on in Savannah for there being galleries or the idea of having local representation. I never thought that was something that I would even be looking for. Like I was showing with a lot of galleries in different cities at the time. Just like showing in New York and Nashville and eventually Dallas. But like as Susan kind of built things up with the gallery and opportunities emerged to show with her, it was like, yes, of course. Like we've got to.
It still is like maybe one of the few or the only galleries in town that's that type where you're represented by somebody and you're there. You know, she has her roster of people.
Yeah, and like as her program has expanded and she's kind of added more artists from the Southeast and it's grown, and so
Yeah, and like she goes to Art Basel and all that. It's very cool.
Yeah, and I work with Susan and the team with installing a lot of the exhibitions and traveling to fairs with them to go do that, and so I get to connect with a lot of the artists as they put on their shows too. Just being involved with the gallery, and it's great because like that's part of the fun for me too of like being here is there's time and space and opportunity to meet a lot of the artists, work with them, help them with things. Like I've collaborated with a lot of people on like weird troubleshooting of technology sometimes.
Yeah, and everything, and helping people install their work. Everything just helps you with materials and figure things out and problem solving. Yeah.
It's like I like taking the time to try to like reverse engineer things and figure out how things work. So if someone has a problem they're trying to troubleshoot, then I'm like, yeah, of course, like let's figure it out and see what we can do. So
that's cool that there was a contemporary art show in Augusta too.
It was a cool show. Very, very cool show. The roster was Marcus Kenny, Michael Porton, me, Elizabeth Winnell, Melinda Borshevitz, Catherine Sando, Tobia. Am I forgetting anybody? I think that might be it. Big artist.
It's a great mix.
Big artist roster.
Yeah.
It was cool. And it was like, I had never been to Augusta, and I had so much fun in Augusta for a few days. And now I'm a strong supporter of going to Augusta.
Of Augusta, the city.
It's great.
Yeah.
There's good camping nearby. It's a fun place. It's an interesting place. So.
Well, I bet it's very naturally beautiful, the golf course and everything,
Yeah, I've never golfed in Augusta. I hear that's a cool part of it, but I like the character of Augusta because it's kind of it was when I was there, or times I've been there since, is a little like rougher downtown, but people were doing things like it. I like places where there's like an emerging spirit of there being space for artists or people to start businesses or because
there's like big raw spaces.
Like spaces available. There's room, and that was a big part of why I wanted to be in Savannah after school. Is it always felt that way to me, and it's changed like over time where that space has shifted and evolved. It used to be more like real estate and where you could have a studio and how you could put on shows, or be more like kind of guerrilla about organizing things. And now that's changed, but there's so many people doing constructive things and like working for the long game to try to build things that we have way more opportunities than we used to.
Especially since like all of Starland has opened up. So now if you want that kind of like raw space ethos, then there's a whole neighborhood for it. Yeah,
people are like really putting in a lot of work to maintain spaces, to keep opportunities going, to make sure that people are brought together. So it's nice to see, because like I've always been torn being here, like how much time does one have to like work on these initiatives? Because I've always enjoyed like trying to curate exhibitions and bring people together, but there's only like so much time in the day to.
Yeah.
And I was working for SCAD for nearly 10 years also while doing other things. And so trying to like wear all these hats like locally, there's still like many, many cool opportunities available.
Yeah, I feel like this is a part of like just being an adult in general, is you're balancing like your own career and taking care of yourself, and then also various community initiatives like, nonprofits and being on the boards of things and helping raise up certain areas. It's like this is a whole other aspect to juggle in our life, is giving back to the community and or the town in general.
It's good, it's fun, you get to see things grow, you get to support other people. It's definitely one of those like, and that's the weird thing of like how I've fallen into a lot of stuff in my career seems to also relate back to just being present and being around sometimes. Like how did you end up being an art handler on the side? Like, I just happened to work a job for a while where I had to hang some pictures, and I learned how to measure twice, and then I kept doing it, and then somehow I ended up doing more of it. And there was like, I think a lot of things sometimes aren't like by design, like I have a 5-year goal of doing this, but then, if you keep at things, whatever it is, big or small, then like, hopefully, cool opportunities materialize.
Yeah, a lot of it is just being good about like leaving the house and going out to people's opportunities and talking to people and making friends. And
it's Friday night. You're really tired. You'd rather not go out to another lecture or thing. But if you go and you support the people out there doing a thing, then you can't. I mean, you also can't like go expecting there to be return. Like you have to really
But it's like a general circle.
Yeah.
It's like a circle of energy, I think.
Just support structure, being present, being involved.
Yeah.
When I was in school, like I was about as like socially awkward as they get. Like I hated having to talk to people, and like the idea of public speaking was not appealing.
Yeah.
The idea of talking about my work was not appealing. Those were things that like took a lot of time to not like make myself get comfortable with, but more just like letting go of like feeling like I was uncomfortable with certain aspects of what was important to supporting my work, but also just meeting people socially and building community.
Yeah. Just getting older and becoming more comfortable with yourself in general, and just the knowledge as we get into it that like if we're gonna do this and make it our business, is that you have to like it just is. Yeah. All of that, then like the business side of it and the administration, and then all the networking and talking to people, and like whether it's getting up and giving a speech or teaching at SCAD or working your show at an art gallery, you literally have to. So
thinking like if I just go in the studio around the clock and make my work, people will come to me. Like,
well, wouldn't that be amazing?
It'd be super cool.
Yeah,
it can happen, but.
When I first got out of SCAD and I was starting on Etsy, and it was like really early Etsy, so there weren't a lot of buyers, but there weren't a lot of sellers either, not as much competition. And I did have this dream, and it didn't happen. But there were some people who had like a great wave at the beginning of Etsy where they were such huge stars that they literally were sitting home making their work and then just like packaging it and shipping it, and they were selling that much. And like for a certain type of super introverted artist, that would be what a dream, where you're just your own little shipping thing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and like even with trends of like how like you could be selling things on a certain market, that market could change in 5 years. Like even I see all kinds of changes with commission structures and like exhibition opportunities, and the way that I try to carve out support for the work that I do every 5 years seems like it has to radically change. And like I'll try out different methods using technology and different media tools, and some of it seems like it fits, but like I've also seen so many instances where somebody's right place, right time is,
Yeah, I think of it like being a shark, where you just always have to be, you can't get too complacent for too long about your business. You have to always be keeping an eye out and moving. And
also protect the work that you want to do if because there's opportunities, I think, sometimes to like package things up and commodify things in a certain way where it's like, oh yeah, I could make more money with that, but would you be happy continuing to make that work day in, day out?
Yeah.
Like 5 years later, there's weird traps that I've seen in time where just having the luxury and like the privilege of space and being able to make your work and having people that support it is difficult to sustain.
I think it's a real balancing act of I've always heard of it where you have like a few pieces that maybe aren't your aspects, that aren't your favorite thing to do, but that are making you some money, and that's to float you to have the time to maybe be doing other things that you really wanted to do. Like you need a certain amount of both, really.
Yeah, I've maintained a lot of side hustles over the years, and that was originally one of the things I was doing with teaching and working at SCAD was trying to find like a good accord and a good balance where I could work in the studio by night or do certain, and I've done other like day jobs too, trying to figure out like how do you buy time to make the work that you want, because I've also tried to make a lot of work that I never really thought would sell, and that's a whole nother boat sometimes. Thinking like this project is just one that I need to do. I have to do it, and it might be costly, it might take a lot of time, but for some reason I really need to make it. And maybe the support structure is grants, maybe it's fundraising, maybe it's just doing another job. Like what do you got to do to keep
so that's an interesting aspect I did want to ask, because you work so much in new media. So do you make any money? Is there any money from things when you're doing like an installation of sound and noise, or like VR goggles that people put on and look around? Like,
It kind of depends. Like I've seen, it's a matter of like where the work is going and who it's for, and it can be no different than, you know, say a painting. Like you can make a painting just for yourself, and you can send it out and have it in a show, and it travels around. And maybe it's been in a bunch of exhibitions and no one's purchased it, so you pay for shipping, and then you have this work and it comes back. I have a lot of digital work that's lived a very similar life where I've made it and it travels and it goes somewhere and it gets to be seen, and usually that's how I accrue like various technologies, like projectors or media players or things, to troubleshoot like how do I actually execute these digital works. But then there's other opportunities where it may be a commission, and if it's a direct commission where the work is going to a collection or a client, then I get to make something and I know it's living happily running on loop somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, either in somebody's home or in...
You have maybe some digital pieces like running in someone's home.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, just like on loop, like on a TV or on a projector, in different places. And so that's like a whole nother thing of like worrying about lifespan and longevity. How do you keep like things that have components like running over time?
Oh, yeah.
Archive.
Yeah, are you responsible for replacing that equipment every few years or something? Or
well, ideally no, because that would be costly. So it's kind of like a different contract where, you know, you could make a work that, you know, has a shelf life and sell it to somebody. They may still be like, oh, that's cool. It's, you know, have that for 5 to 10 years, or it has to be upgraded, or if it's something that is digital, maybe it just gets archived. And there's like a whole kind of a new evolving space of like trying to maintain work for museums specifically that's new media based, where it's like old diode TVs or like work that's on VHS. Like, how do we keep playing this work that's on VHS over and over without like eventually like basically degrading the tape?
Right.
Like certainly, and also too, like if you have something that's animatronic or on a computer, like that computer is eventually going to break down. It needs to be upgraded. And so I have some things out there that I worry about in time where it might come back to me because there may not be someone on the team that knows how to keep that running. And
right.
Also, I've had installations that have been up for several months where it's something that I've really pushed the limits of what I can do with computers sometimes, where I'm worried it's just going to crash. And I'll like wake up at 4 a.m. and think about, is the computer still running at the gallery, or did it break? Especially with the talking big mouth Billy Bass, there's like all these moving parts, and the more moving parts you add on, it's like, you gotta fix
that's
things.
So interesting, because I think about selling pieces that are like, if maybe something wasn't varnished correctly, or it wasn't framed archivally and it could fade, or if somebody hangs it where the light is streaming in on it and then it's going to fade that way. But yeah, it's so fascinating to think about that even in digital media there's concerns about, like you said, it degrading, or the actual TV that's playing over and over again in the Met, like at some point that TV is going to die. Yeah.
Well, and equally, like I don't think about that with a lot of the like static 2D work that I make, or even sculptural work sometimes. Like I just think it's going out there. It's going to be protected and cared for. But the number of times that works that I've made have come back to me damaged is pretty high, where I've had to, they've been scratched or dented or dinged. And in spite of my best efforts to make things more durable over time, like having work in public spaces means that they often get neglected. And so that can be sad too, because, you know, that like, it may still be there, but like sometimes things aren't cared for in the way that you hope they would be. So just trying to like keep your work preserved is a challenge, especially with like, it's like sometimes I'm testing out things with like resins and other chemicals that like I don't know how that's gonna live in
the temperatures
50,
and things.
50 years, like that could go totally brown in time, but we do our best.
Sure.
So
I wanted to ask, so there was a period, so we kind of been talking about your newer work, but I think it might have been right when you got out of SCAD. I was working at Shop SCAD around 2007, 2008, and we had these pieces of yours. We had this whole collection of like these little sculptures that went on the wall, and they were sort of like spiky, and maybe they were 3D printed. They were like these spiky kind of mountainy icicle looking things. Yeah, we had those, and they were painted Yeah, it would be like an ombre of pink to gray painted things, and they had all these planes of them, and you can just hang them on the wall, and we had a whole bunch of them. So I've always, like, I was working at SCAD, and I was surrounded by these little things. So I feel like I want to ask you about these. Were they 3D printed? Was that?
Yeah. So,
and I'll include photos of these on the Facebook.
Yeah. Oddly enough, there's one just on the shelf, just by us, that has stood the test of. I like to usually keep like one of usually each group of things that like I'll make over time, and so this is like the last one. It's just covered in primer, but from 2015, 3D printed. This is plastic.
Was that an early 3D printing, or how?
No, so that was a pretty good time for 3D printing technology. It's grown a lot, but at that time, you could get some pretty high resolution stuff made. And so I started off learning how to do 3D printing stuff like while I was in school at SCAD, and then I found a good vendor that they were in like New Jersey, and they would just print this stuff because the machine that made that costs like $300,000. And I always wanted to like get the means of production because the cost of making those things was so high that like I never really made any money off of them.
Right.
So, because I had people that were like, why don't you do molds and do multiples? And I was like, I don't like multiples. Like, unless the idea actually seems like it's something that makes sense to be reproducible. Like, I've never been a huge fan of churning out copies of things.
Right. And the whole idea with these is you had a bunch of them and they were slightly different.
Yeah,
so.
Each one unique. But in doing that, I basically had a series of work where it cost as much to make them as I would ever get back. And so they would only really ever self-perpetuate, where if I sold enough of them, I could make some more. And that's kind of the cycle of how I have a lot of projects like that where, if I sell one, then I can make two. And that's
it's a real labor of love.
Yeah, that's my math is like the idea of not like really getting a big return on a lot of work, that it's really just like I can afford to make some of these things because I can sell enough of them to make more.
Yeah.
And so that was a weird like learning lesson about production where other times I will procure the equipment or the machine to make something because the fabrication cost is so high that I just simply can't do it. And people are like, why don't you make this? We'd love to see this. Like, I can't afford to. Like, and if I was to pay someone to make these things, they would charge more than I charge to sell them.
It's like you wouldn't be able to sell it for the amount that you need. So nobody would pay
the specialized work that I'm doing with this doesn't necessarily. So that's kind of why I got away from 3D printing for a time, because it just became too expensive. And like I could have a cheaper 3D printer that would do lower quality stuff, but it was important with that series that they look a certain way and they were a certain quality, and so it was something to like one of those projects that I did for a while, which was a couple of years. Just like made enough of them, and then was like, okay, like what's next? Yeah,
and I'll include photos of these on the Facebook post so people know what we're talking about. But I did see like the archiving of these on your website, and it was under the category where I guess the project was called Lifelike. Is that right? And I was reading the description of them, and I was curious because the idea behind them was like addressing the hybridization of painting and digital technologies, and that you were kind of looking at nature in general. But when I would look at them, I would not be thinking nature at all. They're so perfect, and like the ombre of the painting of them was perfect, and there were sharp edges, and they were like obviously machine fabricated, and I wouldn't ever be thinking nature and then think I need to lean into doing 3D printing of this. So I'm curious, like it's just such a different way, the way your mind is addressing that, than how I would ever think. I'm curious how you were wanting to address nature and then thought of that.
Yeah. So my attachment to an affinity for nature is linked to the sublime, and thinking about places where you can channel having a sublime experience, be it looking at a sunset or being caught on a cliff looking out into the ocean, confronting the vastness of nature, or having also a terrifying experience, because if you think about both like beauty and ugliness or terror and all of the things that seem to like spark a high resonance kind of feeling towards just being alive or being present, that was something that I've kind of circle back on a lot in my work of just presentness and trying to find experiences where I used to like tell myself like I'm trying to convey experiences that I don't have the words for. So I'm using art to try to speak or work with those concerns in a way that you can either do something pictorially or through color or form that you can't express verbally, which was kind of a cop-out to just not be able to explain exactly what I was trying to do. But it seemed like it was a worthwhile pursuit, trying to like go. And I think I was like taking a lot of stuff from like the path of painting before me, of where like the reduction in painting and abstraction and thinking about color and color fields and how those things can mean so much more than just their actual components. Was what kind of
like the emotion of
color. Like what you can convey with like less. And so I went from being a very realist technical painter to not really painting, but like painting indirectly using spray guns and using foils and using these different application methods where I could deal with color and form and space in different ways that seemed like I could expand instead of just being stuck with only pictorial decisions. So that was, and I think like that's somewhere that I'm trying to acknowledge more now in my work, of these like weird little pathways of like starting off with one idea, and then you still think that the work is like very much predominantly about that idea, but you've given yourself space to just roam and explore, and then it may be something entirely different by the time you get there. So that's still like something that's in there, like thinking about nature and space. And like now I'm like trying to brainstorm on some landscape painting ideas that will be trying to combine an interest in manufactured landscapes from movies. So I've been thinking a lot about like the settings and scenes of even like suburban America from the 80s that was like somehow like the same like city in Illinois could be where Michael Myers is like terrorizing teenagers in Halloween, and then just down the street you could also have like some kind of John Hughes movie happening with like kids at Ridgemont High or whatever high school. I think it's Sherman High is the one that's in the John Hughes movies.
Yeah, he was always in the suburbs of Chicago.
Yeah, and like how prevalent a certain type of space is, but also like representations of like nature in film, that like how I have like these like fragmented pictures of like paintings, movies, culture, weird references to spaces that I feel like I know but maybe don't know, like haven't actually physically experienced.
Yeah, because back through memory, it's fragmented. Yeah.
So that's kind of, now I'm trying to like unpack that relationship of like a manufactured, remembered nature that was one that's media based, that wasn't my own, and my own experiences of nature, which I'd spent a lot of time just like roaming around out in fields, out in the middle of nowhere in Ontario, and there was like beautiful sunsets, really long horizons. I'd like sit on the fence and like just talk to the horses, and there was a lot of space and a lot of time, and I think that space is part of the reason I like am living in my own head a lot sometimes, just like spinning wheels on things, because I'm accustomed to it from just internalizing a lot of stuff from being present in space. And I catch myself doing that. Like I really like doing gardening and yard work outside of the studio, because I can get into that same headspace of just being like out in nature and listening to birds and digging up some plants. Like,
that's also, it's part of our generation too, that we as children were able to like be turned out in the morning and just run around either with friends or ourselves and do things, and then just come back at some point at night and getting into adventures on our own. Yeah.
So my relationship to nature seems to change over time too, and like what the work says in relation to it also still evolving.
Do you so on your website you have these kind of like, your work is divided up into these sort of distinct different sort of looks and projects, and like you were moving through different things over the years, and I was curious if you are always sort of like tinkering around with a few different things at a time, or if you are working on one project and it's distinct and then that's over, and then you have a different idea and you move on, and then it's a whole different medium?
It's kind of different times, different relationships to how I work in the studio. A lot of the larger exhibitions that I've had I've lucked out timing wise, or at least tried to. That's part of like the time management strategies too, of figuring out like, do I take on too much stuff, or do I take on just the right amount where I can juggle my work-life balance and like keep busy and not too busy? Because when I finished school, I made myself way too busy. I said yes to a lot of things and was particularly proud of myself for like surviving on 6 hours of sleep a night. I thought that was really cool. Now I think it's not so cool. I try to get a good 8. But I was like, I'm busy. I got a lot of cool stuff going on. This is great. Like I'm doing great. And over time, I've tried to like be more select, not like saying no to things, but just being more clever about how much energy goes into things, so that I'm not stretching myself too thin. Because I definitely got to that point a couple of times in my career where I think when you're in the studio and you're making work just to like get the work out, and you're just trying to fabricate and execute things, like that cannot be fun for the type of work that I make. Because, you know, when you're just like doing sculptural work and you're like huffing chemicals and like having to do like pretty physically difficult work, then it's not like I'm sitting there and like having a good time painting.
Right.
Like
it really feels like work.
Yeah, like it's proper labor, like stuff that nobody really wants to do, but has to get done just to see the work through. Whereas like the periods where I get to do research and learn, and there's space for failure. And if somehow in the projects that I do, there can be room for failure, but it still can be a successful project, perfect. Like that's great.
That's your ideal.
Yeah, because then like there's room for something to go wrong, and then for me to tinker with it or rebuild it or understand or evolve. And so
that could lead to the next series.
Yeah. So that's a hard thing though, to like structure to produce, where either who you're working with gives you room to like all right, I have to see how this all goes, or you know, and sometimes like it feels like maybe it's procrastination and not like presenting an idea right off the bat, but I'm just trying to let things be organic for me, because that's when I'm not just like enjoying making the work, because that's one thing, but where there's actually a good space for things to happen that I think can yield more interesting results.
Yeah, some happy accident.
Yeah,
that was great.
Yeah,
and also
that I can discover, instead of just like this is the thing and you know here it is.
I think it was interesting what you said, where you touched on at the beginning of the career. I think everybody's like this, where you're advised to say yes to everything that comes around, because also if somebody offers you a thing and you say no because you think you don't have time, they might not ever come back around to you again. Yeah. So you really have to grab onto everything in the beginning, and then as you're older and a little more in your career, you have a little more control over it, and you're not so worried that everything that comes around is the only time it's ever going to happen, you know? Yeah.
It's very difficult lessons. Like it's not stuff that you can just like, and I think about this with a lot of people I've tried to like mentor over time, where when I was younger, I was told things by people who were trying to help me, where I was like, no, like I'm just gonna do this. I hear you, but like I gotta figure this out for myself. Like I have to do this. And then of course like whatever they advised would like come true, and then I realized like there's something to that. But sometimes that's what you have to do, I think, to retain a hard lesson, or you really just have to like roll the dice on something to be like, you know, I would have regretted if I hadn't tried that, even if I thought it was likely to fail.
Yeah, you almost needed to prove to yourself that that was the right way to do it.
And there's definitely been like, even now to this date, there's projects that I take on where it's like, oh, should I do that? Or like, is that a good idea? And it's okay, like if I invest a lot of time and energy in something and it still doesn't go the way you hope it goes.
Yeah.
And that's fine, like, because
you learned.
Yeah, and sometimes you put a lot into something and you have expectations of what people are supposed to make of it, or if it's sometimes if it's supposed to sell or if it's supposed to find a home somewhere or if anybody even wants to look at it. And that like is tough because that can inhibit you if you're really like overthinking like all the things that could go wrong or that wouldn't happen. Like I feel like I'm giving myself a lot of extra permission more and more all the time to just cancel out that noise.
Yeah.
And just like just go, like, because you can spend a lot of time I think trying to like craft things, but for me, and this is just personal, like giving myself the room, it always seems to be better for me in the long run, even if I'm like tuning out a lot of like the weird stuff that normally would prohibit somebody from doing a particular thing. It's like, if you feel like you need to do it, the studio is a space to do it. Like why else?
Yeah.
You know,
That's great to have figured that out about yourself.
still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Ongoing challenge of like measure, like, cause I'm calculating a lot and it's maths on cost and time and, you know, what do you do with these things, like in storage and transportate, like there's a lot of variables and it's very easy, like so many ideas that like wake me up at 4 a.m. and then the next day I'm like, oh man, nobody's gonna buy that, like I can't, but it's something that I would need to sell, so it's, you know.
Well, so there's so much that I feel like we could talk about. This is so fascinating. We're kind of coming to the end, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the Billy Bass fish.
Oh, yeah.
Is that what he's called? So I went to you had a talk, and that you had this animatronic fish displayed in the like drive-through window outside of Green Truck, and it was like loaded up with this chat AI where people could ask it a question and it would speak back. And I was thinking about this as you were earlier talking about technical aspects and how things might go wrong, because it was very hot out, and I feel like a lot of times like the fish, the heat was like frying it, right? Like sometimes it was offline because it couldn't handle the heat of being outside in this blazing sunlight. Yeah,
that was my summer last year was an interesting summer because that project was one that when I was brainstorming on what I could do for the drive-through art box, I had no idea. It's like, I don't want to, there was something I was thinking about, like, I kept pinging ideas around. I was like, I really want to do something that's interactive since it is, like, historically a drive-through window.
Very
and
cool.
That got me to animatronics. Now, I had different ideas for some animatronics before because it's something I've, like, dabbled in here and there with trying to bring, like, robotics to life. And then I just had, like, an absurd idea that was like, what if I think I like came across a video of someone like tinkering with a big mouth Billy Bass on YouTube and was like, oh man, I could do that too. Like that'd be fun. And I thought, what could I do with that? And then he was initially just going to tell stories. I was going to preload him with stories of like push button and he would talk and I was like, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
But then I got the idea of him being conversational because I thought, well, why don't I use him kind of as a chat bot where you could go up and talk to the fish and ask him questions.
It was like the most cutting edge technology, right?
Yeah, and
talking about this.
I've been kind of a lot of like these new emerging technologies I sit on for a little while because I try not to like just jump on stuff. It probably has not helped me because I take a little time with like learning about NFTs or AI or like anything that seems like not so much like, do I put stock in that, but like, what can I do with that? And there's a big learning curve to just understanding how a lot of that stuff works.
Yeah.
And so I had not done anything with AI other than the like little built-in Photoshop-y things that we have now. But so I had to cobble together a software program that was a conversational voice-to-text software program. And every time I thought I had figured out like, this is going to be really easy, a new challenge was thrown my way where like the Wi-Fi wasn't strong enough. I didn't anticipate the temperature in the box, the actual size of the box, and putting a small computer in there and feeling like it wasn't going to get broken open and stolen through the sun, like weird things. And I thought I had figured it out and everything was running really smoothly. I put like weeks of work into it, and then over the summer, like a new challenge seemed to like kind of pop up like every week. That was like, why is it down? I set up like remote access to it to restart it and to know when he would crash.
That's great. That's so smart.
There were so many like weird little things where the computer that I had wouldn't auto restart, so I had to get a push button device that was a Bluetooth remote push button to restart the computer. Like strange little things that anybody who's like actually got experience with like programming and computer engineering be like, you could have done that so many other ways. And like, well, you know, I went to school for painting, so don't.
Yeah, it's a miracle that you
done
all of this.
I'm doing my best. But
I feel like most people would have given up way earlier.
It was difficult because my want to see the project through is like, I must make this work. And there was like a lot of failure involved where sometimes it just wasn't working and it'd be like, why aren't you working right now? And I'd go back and get them up and running. And there was things that broke that were out of my hands. Like there was a lot of issues last summer with the ChatGPT servers. They just were slow and weren't working at a lot of intermittent times. It was like, okay. So I learned a lot from it, and people's reactions to the project were fun and hilarious and amazing, and it did all the things that I hoped it would do in initializing a lot of conversations about something that I feel like is a subject that is hard to discuss without things becoming very polarized quickly, where people seem to have a tendency with like new technologies to read an article or hear something from a friend and formulate a very solid opinion on something that is, we kind of have to do that with a lot of things now, but to actually open to have discussions about possibilities, especially with new tools, seems very important to me to be objective but also receptive to just talking. And so I like, that's something I'm trying to carve out more space for now, just projects that maybe leave more room for that type of engagement.
Well, putting it like the face of it being this like goofy, nostalgic, ridiculous talking fish is a good way to just like break down people's barriers a little bit, where it's not scary, not scary like Terminators, like Skynet taking over.
Lightening the mood.
Yeah.
Like opening with a joke. The mood. Yeah. I'm trying to take like that, and I think like I'm having fun more now with that kind of attitude, that maybe part of the entry is something fun or absurd or recognizable or nostalgic, and then there's obviously going to be like some deeper things under that for us to try to unpack. And all of the recordings that I got from the summer of people talking with him, because he was taking all the voice to text translations, and I have chat logs from them, and they're amazing to read, like really interesting conversations across the board. He's now been installed twice more. He was installed for the Pulse Art and Technology Festival at Jepson Center at Telfair Museums this year, and he just came back from Art Fields in Lake City, South Carolina, and I just built him a brand new super fast computer that was specifically designed to alleviate all of the problems I had last summer, and he ran in Lake City for like 10 days straight with only like one or two little glitches that popped up. So
was he inside there?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was inside, so he didn't have the temperature stuff, but like,
yeah.
I took that and was like, I just want to make a version of this that is deployable in a way where I don't have to like constantly like hit the reset button. And so that's kind of like the chance to take a project and do like a 2.0 or a 3.0 is, I feel like we're all like doing that in like micro adjustments and changes like in work, no matter whatever medium. But it's interesting to think about that with like technological projects where you really are just taking the same thing and just improving it by making it more faster,
it's a little more
better.
overt in your case, that it's a new version, a better version, and overtly runs better, so it's like an objective thing. When
I completely changed his personality, where the way that he talked to people was wildly different, so that gaps in how people stopped talking to him I was taking note of, where now instead of him just kind of being there to receive questions and answer them, he now asks more questions back, like follow-ups, and also tells jokes, which makes him like that much more fun. But in me trying to build his personality in a certain way, I also noticed that a lot of the results back from the conversations were a lot more similar than they'd been in the past. Like, the more I try to manipulate his personality to make him talk with people in a certain way, the more the way people interact with him seems to kind of funnel. So
that's weird.
Yeah, it's an interesting social experiment that came out of a pretty absurd idea that I will just kind of keep working with and see where it goes.
Do you mean like people have a pattern of small talk where if things go beyond one or two interactions, they all tend to go in a certain...
Yep. And in me trying to program speech patterns with him that got people to talk for longer, I was able to get longer conversations, but the deviation of weirdness of what kind of things people asked him and the range of questions became much narrower.
Oh, that's very cool. I would love to see that.
Yeah, so that's like, and it's the kind of data that you could actually probably do something with, but like I'm just looking at it, reading it, and
that's like sociological data about conversational patterns.
Yeah,
it's wild.
Which like to me, like I know there's like a lot of like software companies and labs and firms that are like aggregating all this stuff and learning about us to market things to us and what we need and what would make our lives better, or voting polls and blah blah blah, whatever. But like I have it's so interesting to have like all this feedback that feels like it's really earnest, honest feedback from something being out there, where when you put like a picture or even a sculpture out there, like people will tell you what they think of it, but it's a different type of exchange.
The art itself isn't talking back to them. They're not having back and forth.
And it, sometimes you want to be the like fly on the wall, right? And just like listen to what people really think about something, and or you want someone to be really like either more constructive or like, tell me what you really think about this. And when people are having an actual literal conversation with the work and it's being documented, some interesting results. So I'm learning still from this project.
Well, I'm sorry we're not really getting to touch on the art fields too much, because that sounded like a fascinating project and trip you just went on. But I did want to close with talking about so when the show airs, it'll be on a Wednesday, and so that night and the next night you have a 2-day event. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I've been invited along with 8 other local artists to create some activations at the Ships of the Sea Museum. And so from 7:30 to 10:30, both nights, there's kind of a range of different things going on with sound installations, projection, light installations, activations inside the museum, outside, out in the gardens. And it should be really fun because it also coincides with National Maritime Day, and a lot of people in the festival, it's called Celestial Seafarers, have actually combed through archives and history within the museum to make their work kind of about either nautical history or about the museum itself, or history to the region. I, on the other hand, have started with a sampling of the 1995 movie Waterworld. So this is a continuation of...
it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So the last time I did a video installation, I actually asked Billy, the Talking Fish, what he considered to be the worst movie of the 90s, because I wanted to use that as borrowed media. And he told me Batman and Robin, which I could see, I don't totally agree with, but like...
I mean, a lot of people would say Waterworld, right?
Right, so he said Batman and Robin. So I took Batman and Robin for that video installation and basically just kind of remixed, remastered it, put it through like all kinds of filters that I have in this projection mapping software to just use it as the base to make like this new kind of time-based collage. And so I wanted to utilize, it seemed like for this specifically with the tie into the nautical themes, that Waterworld would make excellent sense as an opportunity to continue kind of dredging through bad movies of the 90s to see what I can do with those to kind of...
Very funny.
Yeah, like trying to take like these things. It's a weird experiment because I have to kind of watch these movies like over and over and over again and try to think about like editing them in a way where it's, I'm not just trying to kind of sample or remix or do like a fan cut or something. Like it's really just taking something and repurposing it. Like, and it really does feel like collage. Like if I took, you know, printouts of stills or and if I just kind of put it into my own language, like what does it look like? And that's going to be projected onto a very large wall. But it should be a really interesting experience, kind of moving through the space. We got to tour it the other night after dark, and it's a super cool space to be in.
It's very cool that they're doing this sort of new media thing in this museum, because if people haven't been in it, it's beautiful, and it's just, it's like the building is very traditional feeling, but the work in there, they have these like amazing models of ships, and I once went to a really beautiful exhibition there of enormous watercolor paintings of ships fighting each other and ships in the ocean, and it just, I mean, it's like a beautiful, classic traditional museum.
Yeah, it's just a cool environment.
Yeah, and yeah, the hedge gardens outside are nice. It's like a site where people have weddings, so it'll look very cool, you guys transforming it.
Yeah, it's great because the opportunity is to actually connect with artists working in new media. This is something that many of us here in town are trying to like grow more opportunities to build possibilities for where we can kind of show work that's experimental, and it's you know, either light-based or sound-based, or whether it's video or projection or even, you know, interactive.
So people always think of like the Jepson Museum or some like kind of cool raw loft-like space. So I love the idea that maybe other really traditional Savannah spaces could get on this and want to do this as well. Yeah.
It's always a challenge because like it's not just like putting on a show. Like the technology that you need to do this kind of thing is, you know, kind of like running a concert or like a large stage production. Like it takes a lot to set everything up. The equipment is pretty expensive to either rent or acquire to use, and it's
you have to be on hand to troubleshoot things.
Yeah. And there's a lot of it out there. Like there's many like the Van Gogh experiences and like big immersive projection things, you know, the Sphere in Las Vegas. Like there's a lot of interest in like those kind of things. And it's nice to see that we can build some space for that here in Savannah, because I mean, we have so many cool canvases architecturally, space, like just the nature in town, and so I've been lucky to have a few opportunities to do public projection installations, and this one should be a fun one.
It's great. So this show is coming out on Wednesday. It'll be, I guess, tonight and then tomorrow night, Thursday night. And do people just go to Ships of the Sea and get a ticket there?
I think you can get tickets at the door, but there are also tickets available online. Okay. So I think if you go to the URL, well, I would just Google Ships of the Sea.
Yeah, there'll probably be a ticket on Eventbrite.
Yeah,
I would think.
They have like a /events page. But also if you look up Celestial Seafarers, I think that also tagged too. But yeah, I would definitely.
It's a mouthful, just the title of it.
Celestial Seafarers at Ships of the Sea Museum.
Well, that's fantastic. I can't wait to see it. And thank you so much. Well, this has been a really wild, freewheeling ride through your mind/studio.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody. This has been Will Penny, and you can find us on Facebook. We have a page called Arts on the Air, and I will post about Will and post photos of his pieces so you can see an overview of his wackiness. Thank you again.